What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Things You Don't Hear in Church podcast. My name is Ethan.
And my name is Derry.
And guys, check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Instagram, TikTok. Although we're not so much on TikTok. I feel like TikTok kind of fell off in the last couple months, and me and Derry both don't care for it. But we are on Instagram mostly. We see those messages that come through, and we like to post on there, and also mostly on YouTube. So if you really want to check out more content, head over to YouTube. We can respond to you on email, DMs, whatever you guys want to answer your questions about the Christian faith. That's why we exist. And so please send us the questions that you have, and we'll try to answer them. And maybe we'll even make a video about it. So today, what are we talking about, Derry?
Yeah, so today I'm going to give you guys a little example. Maybe you can empathize with this example. Maybe you've been through it yourself. And then we're going to talk about the implications of it. It'll be a fun one. But let's say you're at church on Sunday and you're worshiping. Let's not even say Sunday. Let's say you go on a church retreat, a special weekend away with you and the Lord. Or maybe you can think back to a high school camp if you ever went to one of those, or just a time where you separated yourself and you got to be with the Lord, right? Let's say it was a weekend. You go on this trip. You're worshiping all the time. You're spending time reading the Bible. You're getting closer to the Lord, and that filling up, right? That makes you feel good, but it also makes you feel like you want to share and tell people. You get kind of excited, right? About like, wow, I love the Lord so much. He's done so much for me. He's changed my life in all of these awesome ways. I want to tell people about him. You have that thought. And now there's a lot of responses people have to that thought. Some people are immediately afraid of that, and they think, well, I'm not very good at sharing. I am an introvert, and it's just not for me. And other people think, I could do it. I've never really done it before. But, my friend asked me about God one time, and I shared, and it wasn't the end of the world. So I think I could. And maybe I'm going to start being more proactive, and I'm going to talk to my coworkers. And then they go back to work the next weekend. They get kind of caught up, and they never do it, right? And then there's some people who start to do it for a little bit, and then they kind of stop. And then there's that one friend you have, maybe 1 in a million kind of guy or girl, really great person that's just somehow constantly on fire for the Lord, constantly filled up, constantly wanting to pour out, unashamed, willing to share with anybody they come in contact with the testimony of their life, what God's been speaking to them that day. Christian, non-Christian, doesn't matter. They'll share, and they do a great job of it, right? That's like a very rare example of someone. But we want to know how to emulate that kind of person, right? Someone who is unashamed of the gospel, someone who is bold, someone who's willing to, with humility, with grace and peace, represent who Christ is and share from an overflow of their own life what God is doing for them, in them, around them, that kind of stuff, right? How do you live a lifestyle of evangelism? How do we become people who have that kind of not only fire within us, but the ability to translate that fire outside of us into other people? Right? I don't know if you guys have ever met someone like someone that I described, someone who can just so easily share in such a kind and, I guess, graceful way with someone. But I got some friends that I try to learn from, and they can just so easily, just from an overflow place, share the verse that meant so much to them today. To just random strangers on the bus, or that they're, playing a sport with, and those people they share with don't try to kill them. You know what I mean? Like, that's what we think is going to happen in our minds. But they are genuinely like, wow, that actually means a lot. Like, maybe I don't agree with you, maybe I do, but tell me more about what, like, you just shared with me. And so we want to talk today about how we become more people like that, how we more and more start to emulate and look like Christ. So let's start off at the beginning. Let's start with some definitions. Ethan, could you define for us, from your perspective, what it means to live a lifestyle of evangelism? What is that? What does it mean? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think very simply, it's doing evangelism as a part of your life. And the experience that Derry and I mostly have with evangelism is a scheduled time in the week you go out and share with strangers. That's what we are most familiar with. That's what we've done for years. And that's different than a lifestyle of evangelism. For most of you guys listening, you're probably not in full-time ministry. You probably don't have 2 hours blocked out every Tuesday night to go share with the houseless or strangers down in Waikiki Beach. Especially if you don't live in Hawaii. That would be weird if you fly every every week to Hawaii. That's a waste of money just for 2 hours to share. But hey, God told you to do it and provided, go for it. But
I
yeah,
got it like
so
that.
for most of the people in the world, most Christians, right? Lifestyle of evangelism just means that as you're living your life, you share the gospel when opportunities present themselves, and maybe
Hmm.
sometimes you even try to finagle an opportunity. Maybe it's not specifically presenting itself, but you're like, I'm gonna share with this person. I've had times where I've been talking to people or there's coworkers, and we'll get into stories later, but I'll be like, I'm gonna share the gospel with this person eventually. Like they don't know it,
Hmm.
but they're gonna get it, you
Gonna
know.
happen.
And yeah, pretty much every job I've ever had outside of ministry, besides maybe I was in high school as a pizza guy, but when I was a welder, worked at a coffee shop for a little bit. Now I'm in insurance. Everyone knows me as like a follower of Jesus and
Hmm.
will get talked to about that. And it's one of the most fun because I'm like, you're a captive audience. What are you gonna do? You can't leave me. You work with me. You're gonna see me tomorrow. You have to be nice to me. I don't have to,
That's
but
so funny.
most people are nice. So basically, all that means is you're sharing your faith or your experiences or things that you're learning in the Bible with people around you just as a normal part of your life. But the
Hmm.
problem is, some people don't even know if that's something that should be part of their life. So if you say that, they're gonna be like, wait, I have to do that. And then they're gonna be like, wait, how often? So Derry, do you have any more comments about lifestyle evangelism? And then how often should they do that, and even should they? Is that something
Hmm.
they have to do as a Christian?
Yeah. I think that's good. I don't really have any other comments on a definition. I think people understand that. That was a good definition you gave. Sharing your faith simply as a lifestyle. So not necessarily blocking out time for it, but to the people that you live around, to your next door neighbors, to the person that lives down the street, to the person you buy food from, to the person you work with, to your family and friends that you see at Thanksgiving and other family events, gatherings. Are you sharing your faith, right? Are you representing Christ? So yeah, good definition. And then how often do I have to do it? I would say if we're talking about like how often do I have to have scheduled evangelism times, right? I don't think you have to have scheduled evangelism times. If that's what you want to do and make those a part of your practice so that you get better at doing evangelism, you get some of that fear away from it. Maybe that's something you need to set up for your own life, right? Maybe you need to set up those times where you can practically go out and just talk to a stranger because maybe that's less intimidating for you than I don't know, your mom or a cousin or a coworker or something like that. Um, just to get over that fear so that you can talk to those people. But I think most Christians know on the how often do we have to do it kind of a thing that every Christian gets to do evangelism, right?
Mm,
I would say, I would
you
say
get to. It's not a have to.
saying
It's a get to.
I have to do evangelism would be problematic, not because you have to necessarily, right? It's not like you have to do that kind of thing, but if you love the Lord, you'll obey his commandments, right? If you're loving him, you're going to obey his commandments. And the emphasis in that statement is not, I got to obey these commandments so that I love the Lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an overflow of a love from the Lord will cause you to obey his commandments, right? If you love the Lord, the product of you loving the Lord, the action of loving the Lord, the product that comes from it will be that you're obeying his commandments, right? And so if you're like, well, I have to do evangelism. Well, you shouldn't think like that, right? You shouldn't do evangelism. Honestly, you probably shouldn't be the one sharing the gospel with someone if your attitude is, I have to share the gospel, right?
Wow, I
Because
might
it's
push back
probably
on that
not,
a little bit, but go ahead.
oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, but go ahead.
Because
I'll explain later.
because if you're not loving the Lord, I don't trust you. I don't trust the overflow that's coming from your heart to evangelize to somebody else. You know what I mean? I think you could say the right things. You could articulate the gospel in a good way, and maybe that would be good. Maybe God can use that. I think he can, right? But on average, I want the person that's sharing the gospel to be coming from a place of, I love the Lord so much that I want to obey his commands and I want to share, right? Like Matthew
Mm-hmm.
talks about. I want to share the gospel with people because it comes from a place of wanting to share, not I have to share. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Maybe there's times in your life where you're just feeling down or you're feeling burdened or you're tired or something like that. And we'll kind of get to that question a little later. And there might be times where you feel like, oh, I have to share. But I think for that person, for the average Christian that's in that place that has a lifestyle of evangelism already, it still partially comes from a place of I love the Lord. And so even though I don't feel great right now, my love for him remains. So I'm going to remain in my actions of loving him and keeping his commands and sharing the gospel with people. So I'd say I think you do like have to do it, air quotes. And then how often? I would say, how often are you reading the Bible? How often are you getting filled up? Right. And as often as your tank is filled, you want to let it flow onto other people, right?
Mm.
It's just a natural progression, a natural cycle of are you spending time with the Lord every day? Then that will naturally overflow into your relationships with people. You're naturally going to want to share, I would say, honestly, every day in some kind of way, whether that's doing direct evangelism of sharing the gospel with someone straight up or discipling a fellow Christian, encouraging someone. Like your time with the Lord, your time invested and spent in on that relationship is only going to cause you to overflow into other people's lives naturally. So I don't know if you need to schedule a how often necessarily. Maybe that's necessary for some people to get that discipline into them. But if you have a good discipline of loving the Lord, investing in that relationship often, then I would say it's going to naturally just cause you to do evangelism, and you don't have to worry about how often necessarily.
Okay, so
Ethan, what do you think about that?
the only thing I'd push back on is saying that you shouldn't do it if you're not like compelled, like with like the like, oh, I'm so in the presence of God, I really gotta share. I think you can be like, I don't really want to share, but I'm going to, and it's like not dependent on where you're at emotionally or spiritually with the Lord, but it's like you know the truth, you should share that truth. And the
Mhm.
reason I say that is because I think our habits help form our loves, and I don't think our loves form our habits. I think we grow to love the things that we spend time doing, whether that's like, so with working out, right? Someone might hate the gym, and I would tell them, you have to go to the gym. You have to lift weights. It doesn't got to be a lot, but you got to get there and you got to do something. And then over time, they will learn to love the gym because their body will realize how good it is for them and they'll want more of that. And then they'll just fall in love with the gym. Same thing with spending time with the Lord or reading the Bible. When I was a youth student, someone told me that if you don't want to read the Bible, I don't think you should in that moment because you're not going to love it. So you should only read it when you love it. And I thought that was profound advice when I was a kid. I was like, holy cow, that's
Yeah.
crazy. I've never been told that. I was told, like, no matter what, read it. Now as an adult, I'm like, even if you don't want to, you should read it. Like it's not a
Mhm.
this is a non-negotiable. You got to do the
You
things.
reading it's going to change you wanting to read it 100%.
Right, exactly. And so you sharing the gospel is going to change you wanting to share the gospel. And so maybe if you're in a bad mood, don't share it. That's wise. You know, you
Mhm.
don't want to look like a jerk presenting the love of God, you know. Or if you're just
Mhm.
like in a place where you're just like, "Oh, I'm just so overwhelmed and stressed, I can't calm down." It's like, "Yeah, don't share it. Don't do that."
Mhm.
But if you're just kind of like, I'm having a pretty good day and I'm not like super overwhelmed by the presence of God right now, but I won't share it. I'm like, nah, I think you still should. And yeah, I think our habits form our loves. And so if you can try to look for opportunities to share it, then you should. And that's about the end of the pushback. With the agreement side, I'd say, yeah, you don't have to,
Can I
you
respond to
get
that
to.
really fast
Yeah.
too? Um, just to get your perspective on this, do you think that it works the same way for something that fills you versus something you're pouring out in? Because in my perspective of like, I read the Bible not because I want to sometimes, but because when I read it, I learn that I want to again because it's
Hmm.
something that fills me. Where evangelism doesn't necessarily fill me, it's like me pouring out what I've already been filled into
Mm,
somebody. And so I don't know if it works the same way. Sometimes after I do evangelism, I'm like, okay, yeah, that was great. Didn't feel like it, but I did it anyway. But I already had the love there. In
hmm.
my mind, the person that I was referencing is someone that isn't actively loving the Lord. They're not obeying God's commandments. And so I
Mm.
don't want someone who's not loving the Lord, not like obeying his commandments to evangelize. I want them to love the Lord so that they'll then obey his
Okay.
commandments.
Yeah,
Does
I'd
that make
agree
sense?
with that. Yeah, if someone's living a pretty lukewarm life or their lifestyle isn't obvious that they're in love with Jesus, I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't be sharing the gospel. My
Mm.
coworker, she told me that. Um, Actually, I won't tell the story because I don't know if they're ever going to watch it, and it's a kind of personal story, so I won't say that. But all that to say, basically, the moral of the story is my coworker had a couple run-ins with some hypocritical Christians, and she was kind of like, I don't want anything to do with church and Jesus if this is how it is.
Mm.
Um, and I told her, I was like, man, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Like I totally understand why you would feel that way. And this is why we started the podcast. It's for people who have these frustrations. But what was I going to say? Oh yeah. If someone's not loving Jesus with their life and they like in the worst extreme are getting drunk on the weekends and sleeping around and, you know, they're dealing drugs but they're like, I go to church on Sunday. It's like, you shouldn't share the faith. You're probably not a Christian.
Not good representation.
So yeah, you're probably barely saved. So you definitely shouldn't be sharing. You should listen to what's being shared and repent. And so I was looking at it as like a pretty active Christian, someone who has a good discipleship, good rhythms, good Bible habits. They just don't do evangelism. But yeah, so I would agree with what you were saying. But yeah, if someone's just like, hey, I got my quiet time down, I spend time with God every day, and listen to worship music, and I post about my Bible studies on Instagram, and they're just not doing evangelism, I'm like, you got it. You should just kick it up a notch. In response to what you said about pouring out, I have had many times where I'm sharing the faith, and I feel filled afterwards. Like,
cool.
And that's probably because I'm an extrovert, and an argument to say I have more of the evangelistic giftings, quote unquote. But I don't like when people say evangelism's a gift because that people use it to justify not doing it. But it's definitely up there as a gift of types.
Yeah, the evangelist is a gift.
Yeah, it's like so is pastoring, but that doesn't mean you're exempt from shepherding people who look up to you. You're not a pastor,
for sure.
You know, just because you're leading people. Anyways, I like evangelism, and so oftentimes I come back from sharing the faith, and I'm just like pumped. I'm like, let's go! That guy heard the gospel. I feel like so much more energy. Like I'll feel like tired and lethargic. I'll share my faith, and I like feel like I'm invigorated with this power, and I'm like, who's next? Who wants that? Who wants the holy smoke? You know?
True. Very true.
So if people are scared that it might drain them, just try it. You might feel filled up. You might be like, all right, when's the next person? When's the next time I can do this?
Thoughts on how often?
For lifestyle evangelism, I would say as often as opportunity presents itself, and almost, if your coworkers are there, you can make a goal like this year I want to share the gospel with everyone on my team in my work or everyone on my department. I work in a pretty small office I'm the 5th person. So everyone's already heard the gospel from me, and I've been there for 2 months. And I've taken time intentionally. Like there'll be days where it's me and another person in the office, and it's pretty slow. And I wait till it's slow. I don't want to disrespect anyone's working hours. You know, you want to be a good steward of your work, and so you want to bring honor to your bosses and bring success to your bosses because that's godly. And so you got to learn to be wise. You don't want to ignore your work for the sake of the gospel, although there's certainly times for that. But in general, as a rule, try to do it when it's slower and that, you know, you're not stressed for time. The other person isn't stressed. And I'll just walk over and be like, you know, because I'm new. I've been there for 2 months, so I have good excuses for asking questions about getting to know people because I don't know them. And then I'll just ask them, like I was in ministry, and then I'll be like, oh, what's your relationship to religion? Like, what are your perspectives? And then you just listen. You know, I'm not trying to force anything down. Like, oh, brother, did you hear like Jesus died on the cross? And I'm not doing that. I'm just saying like, hey, what do you believe? And then I'm opening the door for a conversation about spirituality where I'm asking about them and they're giving me information. And I'm not saying, oh, that's wrong. You're wrong. You need to change this. I know they're wrong. They probably believe they think I think they're wrong. Like the fact that I'm a Christian and I'm saying, I'll say boldly, like Jesus is the only way to life. They know I don't agree with them, but I'm being respectful so I can have more conversations in the future. I have so many cool opportunities. Like someone gave my boss a Bible, like one of our customers. And so I saw it on his desk one time. I was like, hey, is that a Bible? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, like, do you read it? Like, are you a Christian? And we had a conversation about his background in faith. And I didn't push back and say, oh man, like, oh, you got to do this, this, and this. I was just like, oh man, thanks for sharing. And then, you know, I have work to do. So I'm going to go back to work. And then I'm going to wait till the next time God opens up an opportunity. So long-winded answer to say small bits here and there for your coworkers open up the opportunity for larger things. But for strangers, whenever opportunity comes, I'll be in the sauna talking to people. I'll share the gospel if I can. I got you for 10, 20 minutes.
Here.
Yeah. Wait, you just wait. You
wait.
One of my favorite jokes. All you think is out loud. Or like the hot tub, you know, a couple months ago, my wife and I were in the hot tub with this guy, and he talked to us about how he was an author. and he's writing a book on
Hmm.
how to find fulfillment. And I'm like, what a layup into the conversation about faith, dude. How do you think you find this? And we talked for probably an hour and a half, and so many people
Wow.
were coming and going. Yeah, maybe an hour. I would say an hour and a half, but so many people were coming and going in that time that they heard the gospel because it was loud in there, so you had to talk kind of loud. And other Christians were there, and they were like, "Hey, I gotta go, but I love hearing, seeing what you're doing." Like, it encouraged other people to go share their faith. So, you should do it as often as opportunity knocks. And I would say specifically try, if you're in conversations with people who are more talkative, capitalize on those. If people aren't interested in talking to you in general, they're like, "Hey, how's it going?" They're like, "Hey." Don't do that. You don't waste your time, you know, unless the Lord's really pressing you. But yeah.
We have a friend who, just to spur him on to living a lifestyle of evangelism, he just knows he'll forget. And he knows it'll just like, a week will go by, 2 weeks will go by, and he won't share the gospel if he doesn't schedule it out. And so he schedules it out, and he has like a deal with God where every day he has to share the gospel with at least one person. And a couple of times he's not woken up. He's like been going to sleep, like you're about to nod off, you're about to close your eyes, like to fall asleep. And he remembers, I haven't shared the gospel with someone, and he has to get up and he has to go drive to somewhere and find somebody and share the gospel with them. And so pretty cool. If that's what you have to do, and you have to actually like have integrity with yourself and say, this is a goal of mine because this is what the Bible says I need to do, and I love the Lord and I want to share, I'm going to create a schedule for myself. I'm going to say, like, I have to share the gospel at least once a week, or have at least one spiritual conversation surrounding the Bible and the gospel with my coworkers, with my family, or whoever the goal like person is that you think the Lord is like trying to reach out to. You know what I mean? You can of course involve him in who that person is. But maybe that's what you need to do. But for some people, maybe you're just good at, living a lifestyle, and that lifestyle happens to be one of a Christian and of evangelism, and it's just a natural overflow. Some people work better off of discipline and schedules, and that's what they got to do.
Yeah. One thing I like to think about is the way I put it in perspective for myself is like, what do I naturally enjoy and what am I sharing with people? Like we both, me and you, like working out, and my boss likes working out. So I'll talk to my boss about working out sometimes. And like one time he walked by and he saw me listen to Dr. Mike Israetel, and he's like, "Oh, I love that dude." And this guy. And
He didn't fire you immediately?
No, I can listen to
For
whatever
watching
I
a
want.
YouTube video at work?
No, he doesn't care. He doesn't care at all. I listen to many hours of podcasts if I'm not making calls. But sometimes I don't because I just can't focus on my work, and then I'm just stressed.
Right.
It's just like really easy work, and I'm just like, I gotta get it done, because it's like I'm trying to watch a video and listening about the science stuff while also trying to respond to an email, and it's just my brain's in two different lanes. So, yeah. So it's like I like working out. My boss likes working out, so I talk about that. Or I like to share personally. I like to share about whatever I find interesting with other people, because I'm like, you will probably find this interesting, and so I look at it like that. Like I'm not trying to preach the gospel right now to convince you that you right now need a savior, but I'm going to talk about God in a way that spurs on interest and presents it like I'm genuinely serious about this. Like, look, this is my passion. This is what I love. Like, this is like serious. And then that'll get other people to be like, oh, wow. Like the second week I was at this job, I was talking to my coworker, and I forgot how we got on the topic of faith, but he's a desk right in front of me, so we just sit back and look past the screens or right between the divider. It's a little bit weird. So,
nice.
But he's like, "Oh, I love these conversations," and he like lit up, and I was like, "Dude, like, tell me what you believe." And he just he was super stoked, and he was totally fine with me saying like, "Yeah, I don't believe that, but like, I'm so interested in what you're saying," and it was a great time. I was like, "This guy is awesome."
Our next question is, how can it look different person to person, right? There's lots of different kinds of people. People communicate in very different ways. Different cultures even have very different relating styles and communication styles. So how can this look different person to person while still maintaining a lifestyle of evangelism?
Person to person, you really got to know how people communicate. As a general rule of thumb, people like talking about themselves. And so if you take interest in them and their views and how they came to those conclusions, they may be like open to talk. But you also might find you ask people and they're like, I don't want to talk about that. I remember I talked to this one guy at University of Hawaii, and I asked him his belief in faith, and immediately he's like, "Hey man," he's like, I don't like talking about this stuff, especially with strangers, so I'm good. And I was like, "Okay, yeah, no worries." And I was like, "Okay, like that's unfortunate, but whatever." And so it really
Mhm.
varies person to person. I don't know how much I can speak into like how do you talk to this person in this situation versus that person in this situation. It also
Mhm.
it goes a long way to know what's going on in the person's life, having context for where they're at. Because you might tell them like,
Mhm.
"Oh man, you got to follow Jesus because when you die, if you die without Jesus, you're gonna die and go to hell and be separated from God and be like either you're gonna disappear forever or be eternally tormented or eventually come to heaven one day. It just depends on what you believe. And also, there's one truth, and we'll all find out.
Mhm.
You could do that long-winded thing about hell. Don't do that. That's a joke. Um,
Yeah, don't do that.
but you might tell someone, "Hey, you gotta believe in Jesus Christ, or you'll go to hell." And you don't know if
Mhm.
who knows if they just lost a family member who wasn't a Christian, and they're thinking in
Right.
that context, like, "Oh man, is my dad in hell?" Like that's a big deal.
Mhm.
So you want to get context for where they're at in their life, and so really it starts with a lot of learning about the person before you present the truth. I would say, that's a
Yeah,
general rule. What do you think?
for sure. That's good. I think I was more thinking along the lines of Christian to Christian, not necessarily a person that you're evangelizing to, but like, how do
Mm,
you, person to person, like, let's say
yeah.
I'm an introvert and like, I just don't like sharing. Like, I don't like having those. I don't talk to any of my coworkers about any topic I'm interested in. Why would I talk to them about God? You know what I mean? Like, I reserve that for like people who are actually really close to me in my life versus like someone like you who will talk to anybody about
hmm
anything that they want to know about or don't want to know about.
Oh
You know
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean?
If you are an introvert and you're like, I share with people close to me who aren't Christians, that's great. Love it. I would still say, if you can, try to share with your coworkers because who knows if you're the only Christian that they'll ever meet. You're probably not.
Hmm.
Statistically, if you're in America, you're not. But it's
Hmm.
likely that it's not likely, but it's like possible you're the only Christian they see on a regular basis. And so the question you really want to ask is, do you want this person's eternal destination to be dependent on whether you want to talk to them or not? And I know that's like a little
Hmm.
bit harsh to say and can kind of sound like the youth pastor who's like, you better share the gospel with your friends or else it's your fault they go to hell. It's like, I'm not trying to do that at all. Everyone's accountable for their own
Hmm.
sins. But if God has
For sure.
placed you in a situation where you are the main person that person's seeing every day, and they can go to heaven for eternity because you did something, one that's exciting and an honor, but also like very
Yeah.
serious weight to be considered. And do you want your
Hmm.
personality type to be a reason someone spends eternity in hell?
For sure. That's good. What about different ways it can look person to person,
Hmm
like different ways to share, right? Like, do I have to share with my coworkers? What if I'm living a lifestyle of evangelism in like my leisure time?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I don't know, like playing video games or like playing chess. Like, can I just share with those people like online, or does that not count?
That definitely counts. I would just say, and if someone's like, oh, I do evangelism, I'm just like, I don't have a work culture where we talk to each other. I might feel like, hey, that's okay, probably, and you can just pray for them.
Hmm.
But if someone refused, like, oh, I won't talk to my coworkers, then I'd be like, hey, dude,
Hmm.
you can't have the
Right.
attitude of you won't. But if it's just not a thing
Right.
that happens, it's just not a thing that happens. And so
Yeah.
you could like if opportunity presents itself, capitalize on it. Um, but yeah, you don't have to go around like an anxious little mouse running around the office trying to share the gospel with everyone. Also, if you're an introvert, maybe try a track. Maybe be like, hey,
Hmm.
be like, hey, you could say something like, hey, this last week at my church, I was really inspired by the message, and I just want other people to have an opportunity to know what Christians believe, and so I just thought this would be pretty helpful to explain if you're ever curious. It's just a one-page little pamphlet that talks about what we believe. That might be a great way to
Yeah.
get it. And it's like now you're an introvert. You don't have to talk to them. Now, if the Lord convicts them, they might come back and talk to you and be like, hey, how do I get saved? so
Yeah.
that be ready for that. But I think tracks are a great answer if you are uncomfortable talking to people.
Hmm. For sure. Yeah, I think you brought up something that was pretty good. Like, what if you work from home, right? You work remotely. You're not having
Yeah.
casual interactions with your coworkers. You know what I mean?
Evangelize
Like,
your cat.
you're not just casually on a Zoom call. Like no one's doing that. Like, you're gonna have to find other instances of doing evangelism, whether that's in your day-to-day, like more mundane side of life, shopping, hanging out, doing whatever it is, or like say you do stuff online, you play video games where there's a chat. you play Roblox or Minecraft or Call of Duty or something random, and like you can talk to people, right?
Mhm.
Then you can represent Christ in lots of different ways when you're on those. You know what I mean? So there are lots of different ways, I think, or forms that evangelism can take, living a lifestyle of evangelism. Really, the way I like to think of it is like there are as many ways to do evangelism as things in your lifestyle, right? Like
Yeah.
for whatever you include into your lifestyle is going to be like a way you can do evangelism, whatever, if that's like a sport or if whatever extracurricular activity that is, if you work or if you have family meetings or if you're a part of a parent teachers conference or something. So many different ways, so many different actions you have with people where you can share.
So the next question we're gonna cover is, what if we only have Christian friends?
Yeah, like say you live in the Bible Belt and you're real committed. You know what I mean? You go to a prayer meeting on Tuesday, and you go to youth group as a youth leader or something like that on Wednesday, and then on Sunday or on Saturday you're serving at whatever it is, a food drive, and then Sunday you go to church for all 5 services, right? And because you live in Texas and they have 5 services, and that's all the social interaction you have, and then you work remotely or whatever, and you just don't have an opportunity to talk to your friends. I would say if that's your case, you probably are too insulated. You probably have a bubble
Yeah.
that's unhealthy, and you need to stop going to church so much. You know what
I
I
was
mean?
thinking the same thing, bro. I was like,
Like it's great to do those things. It's great to have a prayer meeting, but if you're only ever filling yourself, like, and you're never pouring out, then you're just gonna get like spiritually constipated. You know what I mean? And become inactive. And you have to have opportunities for sharing with the world. Like we are supposed to be in the world, but not have it affect us, right?
mhm.
So you have to be giving yourself options to be able to be influenced by the world. One, so that your faith can be tested, but also so that you can share with people who need to hear about God, and more people can come and start being a part of the church. So I just think you need to maybe it's a slow kind of progression thing. Maybe you're afraid. Maybe you're not used to it. Maybe this is the lifestyle you live for a long time and you have to slowly ease into it. But find ways that you can either start a hobby or something like that, where you can start to share the gospel, start to have a lifestyle that includes more non-Christians. And then as soon as you start to meet people, make friends with them, start inviting them over to your house, having movie nights with them, having game nights, going to events, whatever it is that you like to do to have fun, inviting them to church, maybe if that's what you want to do. And you can start to evangelize them.
Yep. I was saying the same thing. You said in the South they go to church. They have 5 services a week, which is a weekend, which is crazy. I like that's good. You're using your building a lot, but that's 5 different churches, in a sense. You know.
Yeah.
Also, why are you going 5 to the same worship set, the same sermon? Did you not get your notes done the first time? Like, my God, I don't even actually take notes during service, but yeah, it's just hilarious. Like if you're going to church 5 times a week and you have no Christian friends, maybe cut down to 2 times instead of 5. Maybe 1. 1 would be best, but you know, it's like withdrawal. You can't just cold turkey. So, but I was gonna say, yeah, the same thing you said. Like, join, get in like a hobby, like pickleball. Get in a pickleball league or a basketball league or something. Like, what do you like to do? Go meet strangers that aren't Christians. Probably actually learn something too. Probably learn how to be a better Christian from interacting with non-Christians.
Absolutely. What if that same person that is kind of in that insulated bubble says, well, I live in this part of the Bible Belt, and here everybody knows about Jesus. Everybody has already heard the gospel, and they've either rejected it or accepted it. And like, it's going to be of no use for me to share. You know, there's a church on every corner, and everybody either goes or they hate it. Like, evangelism just isn't effective. What do you think you would say to someone like that?
I would just say you don't know that. You don't know evangelism is not effective. Maybe someone needs to hear the gospel 100 times before it happens. Now, you're probably right. Everyone probably has heard. That doesn't mean you stop hearing. It's like with my sales, right? Like I send the quote, and if they don't respond, I'll just keep sending it all week long. And then guess what? If they don't respond by the end of the week, in 6 months, I'm going to email you again. And if you don't respond, in 6 more months, I'm going to email you again. And my coworker, my boss has said stuff like, I've emailed people for like every couple months for 2 years, and I finally get their business. And I'm like, see, there's something like that where it's like, you just got to be persistent and also be a good person, you know?
Yeah.
But if they're like angry, like, I don't want to hear the gospel. Like, okay, no worries, dude. Just be careful. Touch it. Like, don't stop being a Christian. Don't stop being Jesus to them, and wait for an opportunity. But yeah, if you're in the Bible Belt and you're like, everyone's already heard, it's like, well, you could say, maybe move to those who don't hear,
Oh,
and become a missionary and go to the unreached.
interesting.
That's always a good solution. Everyone around me has already heard the gospel. Great. Go somewhere where they haven't. That was my reality when I was 20 and I joined YWAM. I was like, everyone in America's already heard the gospel and they rejected it, and I don't want anything to do with this, so I'm going to go to those who have no hope. And
Wow.
God had me do that for a couple of years. Then he said,
There you go.
go back to America, sucker. And I was like, oh no.
And also, everybody knows that even if there's 10,000 people that go to a church, half those people are probably not living lifestyles that are anywhere close to what a Christian should be living, right? So even if they've heard the gospel already, a lot of people that have accepted, I need Jesus as my savior, haven't actually submitted their lives to him. And so they actually do still need to learn about what it means to have a relationship with God and what it means to surrender to God, right? So they still need to hear the gospel, and they still need to hear that articulated to them. There are so many people that you can say, oh, like, have you heard about Jesus? Say, yeah, I'm a Christian. And you say, oh, like, what's your life like? What's that relationship like? And they're like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I go to church on Sunday. Like, what else is there? Right. And they're going to bars and clubs and whatever, and they're cheating on their wife in their spare time. You know what I mean? Like that. I learned about a guy like yesterday who was like a Christian. He is a Christian. He was like hyped up that he met another Christian. He had a Jesus shirt on, but he was like actively cheating on his wife and like encouraging other people to. And it's like, dude, you don't know what the gospel is.
Was this at Evangelism?
Yeah, it's like you don't know the gospel. It's like you don't know what a Christian is really like. Like, you're even wearing a Jesus shirt. You come from such a saturated like Christian culture, but you literally don't know what Jesus is talking about himself.
That's crazy. Yeah, he's not. I would be slow to say he's a Christian, to be honest. I know it's kind of hard.
No, he's not a Christian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I met a guy one time who I preached the gospel to, and he kind of like got really somber and was like, dude, I know. He's like, you're right. He's like, Jesus radically saved me. I think he was somehow in he was in some unjust situation in like Sri Lanka or something like that, basically like a working camp. And he escaped and got on a boat and met some random Christians in this other country after he'd been through some terrible stuff, gave his life to Jesus, moved to Canada, got married. And he's like, I have not been following Jesus. He's like, and I was like, we got on the topic of baptism. He's like, I've never been baptized. And he was like, and so we got to baptize him in the ocean, and he got like refired up for Jesus. It was really cool. Wow. And so even if people say they're Christians and they're not living Christian lifestyles, the gospel can bring them back.
Yes, sir. Alrighty. The next question is, how do you get over the fear of evangelizing to people that you know really well? Maybe these are people that you care a lot about, or that you have really close relationships with, and you're like, I don't want to lose that relationship. I don't want to make it awkward.
Right.
I don't want to like ruin this good thing that I have, whether it's a close friend or a family member. You're just afraid to talk to them about this. How do you get over that fear?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because it's so emotionally charged. And depending on the person, if they've had bad experiences with Christians, they might project that onto you. And so you really gotta, that one might take some time of just showing them how much you care through different ways, having them over, making them a meal, taking them out to, I don't know, if you like golfing, go golf or something that you both enjoy, where you can just have relaxed time together. And then maybe you don't rush into it. Maybe just ease into it and be like, hey, like, I know that, like, you know that I'm a Christian, and I know that we both know that you're not really following Jesus too seriously. Like, tell me what you believe about religion. Like, where do you land with that? I actually have been thinking about that. There's one friend I have back home who we used to do Bible study together, and now they don't really walk with the Lord. And I've been really thinking about like, how am I going to approach that conversation? Because I think I have a duty as this person's friend to approach that conversation. And I have been wrestling with myself if they're really close. If I'm really close to them and I don't want to lose them as a friend, to say, hey man, like, your lifestyle's wrong and you should change it. What's going on?
Yeah. I think there also is a difference between having that much of a confrontative confrontative conversation with someone and
Confrontational.
just sharing simply, right?
Yeah, true.
Like someone can do evangelism to someone and not be having like a you need to come to Jesus kind of moment with them. But those things are good to have, right? Like you need to have those with some of your friends if you're like that serious. Paul talks quite a bit in the New Testament about confronting Christians that are falling away and what we need to do with those kind of people in a loving way. And so we need to hold those people accountable and try to get them to follow the Lord and love the Lord. But it doesn't mean that you have to do that with every friend that's like, falling away. You have to sit them down and have that kind of conversation. A lot of people just need to hear the gospel.
No, bad.
Yeah, bad Christian.
If you want to lose their friendship, do that.
Yeah. I would say if you're afraid to share with someone because of the intimate relationship you have with them, because you're afraid to lose that relationship, I don't know how intimate of a relationship you actually have. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to lose someone based off of one conversation with them that you could get into, like Ethan talked about, like really easily, like, hey, this is what I believe. Like, what do you believe about life? Like, if you're going to lose someone off that conversation, like you probably don't have that close of a relationship already, unless you've talked to them about it a million times and this is the millionth and one time. And they're like, I told you not to talk to me about this again because we've talked about it so much. Then that makes sense. But like, if that one conversation that's super tame, just an intro conversation is going to break the back of that relationship. I don't know how close of a relationship you have in the first place. And I think you would probably know that about that person if that was going to break your relationship. And then you can use wisdom at that point. But most relationships you have with people that are close, like if you have a parent or a sibling or a best friend or something like that, and you're afraid to share with them because that relationship is so close, I think one conversation isn't going to like destroy that relationship. It's probably going to deepen it because you're being vulnerable by sharing what you believe, right? You don't have to go all into like what Ethan talked about of earlier of like hellfire and brimstone and all that kind of stuff. But you can just genuinely be like, hey, like I was not feeling good this one time and I read this verse and this is what the verse was. Or God spoke to me and this is how I feel better now. Like, and you're just sharing a vulnerable experience with them.
Sorry, I got excited about that.
You're sharing a vulnerable experience, and it's like you would want them to share a vulnerable experience with you, something that happened to them, and that's all you're doing with them. They're probably going to be happy for you, and maybe they'll have some questions, and you can have some good conversation about it. I think it's going to end better than a lot of people think it will, even though it seems like there's more at stake or on the line with that kind of a conversation with somebody you love.
Yeah. On the topic of this is what God spoke to me about, if you say God spoke to me and said this, people get so intrigued. Like, one, your non-charismatic friends who are cessationists will be intrigued and probably call you a heretic. But you can just show them all the times the Bible God speaks to people. But no, genuinely, non-Christians don't have they understand the concept of a God creating things. I've found they don't really have that many concepts of God speaking to people. It really like gets them intrigued. They're like, what do you mean God spoke to you? I'm like, well, I was praying and he responded. How I speak to you, you speak to me, right? Like, and then they're like, no, but like, what do you mean God is speaking to you? And I'm like, yeah, God is moving and active and he dwells inside of me. Like his spirit, the spirit of God is inside of me. And then he speaks to me and they'll be blown away. So that's a great way to be like, yeah, God was speaking to me and then this thing happened. It's like, wow, what?
That's good. Nice. Next question.
We go into how do I share with people I work with without losing my job?
Ooh.
Don't worry about your job, dude. Give it all to Christ. Reckless abandon. Turn or burn. Boom. Stand up in your cubicle desk and turn or burn preach.
And share. Yep.
And if they say you're getting fired, sue them for discrimination.
Perfect.
So there's that. That's how you get on the... That's some religious freedom fraud right there.
Religious freedom fraud? That's crazy. I feel like that's the next God's Not Dead movie. That's the title of it. God's Not Dead, religious freedom fraud.
That's hilarious. Yeah, so Dario, what do we do if we don't want to we want to make money to feed our families and be a good Christian that provides for people?
That's good. I think one, how you share is going to be important in this instance. because you can be someone that's in a hostile environment to the faith where you're not really able to share that much, but because of the overflow that God has given you in your heart, right? You don't have to just share the same script all the time. Like if you're just constantly telling people turn or burn, or you're constantly telling people the same thing over and over, people are going to be like, hey, you're getting annoying. Like, we're going to fire you or this or that thing, right? But if you're just genuinely coming from a place of like, hey, this is what God spoke to me this morning, or this is what is encouraging me today, or your coworker's going through something, they're sharing about it, right? People complain all the time at work, right? That's like the main thing to do at work is complain about work or complain about something that's going on in your life and how it's making work harder, right? People do that daily. The Christian response to complaining, it's not complaining again, or it's not encouraging people to complain, right? So you can respond in a way like, wow, like how can we fix that situation? This is how I usually approach those situations as a Christian, or this is how God has encouraged me in this or that situation, right? And you're giving someone advice. You're having a conversation you already have with them all the time. And it's really easy. You're not just saying the gospel to them. You're saying, hey, this is how I approach this situation because of the kind of God I believe in and what he said about my life and what's going to create the most productive life and a life that's the fullest of thankfulness or whatever the situation is that you can speak into, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, you're not someone who's just continually, sort of being annoying, but you're actually sharing useful things to people that are going to make them see value in the gospel, right? They're going to see value in being a Christian and value in the things that the Bible talks about. Now, to the person that may be in a job where like they simply just cannot share about Jesus, right? Like you're a Secret Service agent or something. You know what I mean?
They
and
can't
it's like
share about Jesus.
if you pause to
Hey,
share the
Mr.
gospel
President.
with someone, like someone's getting shot or there's a gap in security or something like that. You know what I mean? Okay, I understand that situation. I would say you need to do your job over like sharing the gospel in those situations. You can find other times to share the gospel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're someone who has just a normal job and you feel like you can't share the gospel because your bosses aren't Christian and you feel like there's a threat of losing your job. I would say, at least for me personally, in that situation, I would trust that the Lord is going to take care of me over the threat of losing my job because of the politics of that work. And of course, there are different situations. I don't have a family I'm taking care of. I don't have the anxiety of like, if I lose my job, what's going to happen? But I do know that we're called to share the gospel with people, right? Maybe in your own conscience, you would say, well, I can find other places to share the gospel. But I think that you could find covert enough ways to get around those people that are going to firing you and being able to share with whoever it is in that instance that you can share with. Let's say you work at a restaurant and you're a server and your bosses are like giant atheists or witches or something, who knows? And witches are more likely, honestly. And they just hate you. And I'm sure you could find ways to be encouraging to people. You're having tons of conversations at tables. Other customers are maybe coming up to you and talking to you, asking questions. Like there's going to be opportunities. There's even going to be opportunities with your bosses to talk with them as the Lord provides time. I think that we can learn sort of from Christians in the Middle East that have conversations with Muslims. Their lives are in danger. It's not just their jobs that are in danger, right? Like their lives are in danger and they're still going out and they're still sharing, but they're using wisdom in doing it. And that's what someone's going to need to do if they're in that kind of a situation, I would say, because you want to keep your job most likely, right? Which is why you have this fear in the first place. So use wisdom. The Lord is going to provide you opportunities because he is stronger than the powers, human or non-human, at your work, right? And the gospel is going to go out and he is going to win the battle. So you can be assured that there are going to be situations that come up where you can share. And if you get fired for sharing the gospel, dude, the Lord is going to honor you because of that persecution, right? And he's going to take care of you. He's going to give you other opportunities. He's not going to leave his children high and dry for doing what he's asked them to do. Like I can assure you of that. Like I've seen it time and time again. Like he's going to take care of you. So maybe that's a practice of trust that you have to have with the Lord, that you can look in wisdom for opportunities to share and just learn to have faith and trust in the Lord that if an opportunity comes and you share and you get fired, that the Lord is going to take care of you. You can rest in that security. Maybe that's what the Lord's calling you to do, is even just to have that kind of faith that you could step out, you could lose your job, but the Lord is going to take care of you. Who knows?
Yeah. And on the topic of if you have witches that you work for or your coworkers, before work, you can bind their powers. You can be like, in the name of Jesus, I bind the powers of the demons in this place, of the witches in this place. I bind their power, and I say that the name of the Lord will be proclaimed here. And watch them freak out. They'll be like, what is happening? Like, because they're spiritually aware. They know when their power's sapped. They'll be like, what is happening? And also, if people are sick, you can pray for them. And if you are really in a place where you're like, I can't share at work, I'll get fired. What an opportunity to invite that person over for a meal, or say, hey, let's go take a lunch break together. And then outside of work, build a relationship and a friendship where you can share the gospel. What a cool opportunity to, like, that's what the people in closed countries do. They can't share at work. So they invite those people over to their house. Like, what a cool opportunity to build a community and relationships. And yeah, like praying for people at work would be a really cool thing. My dad told me he had a job, or one of his jobs he had a little bit ago. Someone at his work had like this chronic sickness that they couldn't get healed for. And my dad was thinking like, well, maybe it's not a sickness, maybe it's a spirit. And so he's like, hey, mind if I just pray for you real quick? And he cast out the spirit of whatever in Jesus' name, and she was healed instantly. And she's like, I've never had that happen. She's like, what just happened? Like, that has never gone away. It's just like, there's a good way to share the gospel. You heal people. And then they're like, what just happened? Well, God loves you. That's what happened. So
pretty cool.
There's something.
All right, we have our last question of the day for everybody, and this is a really interesting one in my opinion. Ethan, do you feel, or how do you feel someone can address having a lifestyle of evangelism when they're in maybe a harder season of life, right? A lot of people will say, well, I want to do evangelism, I want to, and maybe I used to have a lifestyle of evangelism, but I just got divorced, or I just lost a kid, or I moved states and I just bought a house and I have a new job and there's a lot going on mentally right now. I have a lot of anxiety because there's so many different factors riding on my shoulders right now. And I just don't have the mental space to share, like to make that extra step, right? What would you say to someone who's in those situations? Is it okay to not share for a season because you're overwhelmed or you've got other things going on? Or as Christians, do we have to share all the time, no matter what?
Yeah, I think it's okay to take times of seasons that are specifically hard to back out. Again, a workout analogy came to mind. And it's like, yeah, if you tear your ACL, you're not allowed to go to the gym for months, maybe a year. You got to let that thing recover. When I tore my shoulder and had surgery, had to recover, couldn't work out for months. And then when I did start working out, it was a slow, like, hey, to use 2 pounds, curl this 2-pound thing, do no weight shoulder flies, like all these things, right? And it starts really slow. So if you're in a really hard season, like someone passed away or your spouse is leaving you, or, you know, any of those extreme things, it's like, hey man, you can take some time. And as you heal, slowly reintroduce it. And don't feel shame for not doing it, because it's like, yeah, our souls need to heal just like our physical bodies need to heal. And when you're in tight situations like that, yeah, just don't. And you can spend that time praying and getting healed by the Lord and communing with other Christians who can help you in that healing, right? If you're stressed at work, and if the reason is like, oh, I'm just overwhelmed at work and it's so stressful, then I say ask God maybe to expand your capacity, because life's not going to slow down. If it's just normal life stuff, like life's not slowing down, ask God to expand your capacity. Say, hey God, where are the small areas I can? Because it's like how people are like, oh, I'm too busy to go to the gym. It's like, well, are you? Like, can you go on a 30-minute walk? Maybe you can't go to the gym, sure, but can you take a 30-minute walk around the neighborhood? And can you do that every day? Can you, and someone's trying to get in shape in this analogy, so it's like, can you cut out 100 calories here and there? It's like, yeah, of course you can. You can choose to not have as much sauce. You can choose to not have that sugary snack or those chips. And it's like, yeah, you can't get to the gym, but you can stop eating chips at night before you go to bed. And so there's things to do, right? So where in your life can you find small ways to start good habits is the biggest thing. Okay, so maybe I'm not doing evangelism. It's really stressful. It's like, okay, well, can you start praying for your coworkers and asking God for opportunities? And that doesn't require even talking to them. You just ask God, hey, like, help me to grow my love for them, I pray for opportunities to share and help me recognize when those opportunities come. And it's like,
That's great.
I missed a great opportunity months ago, and I've been kicking myself since with my boss. We were talking about life insurance or something, and he said
No
something about
way.
like death, and he's like, "Yep." It was like kind of end of the conversation, a little pause, and he's like, "Well," he's like, "I don't want to die," and he walked away. He said something like, "All I know is I don't want to die," and he walked away, and like 30 seconds after the conversation was over, I was like, I should have said something like, "Dude, you don't have to. I'm not gonna
You want to
die.
live forever?
Yeah, I'm not gonna die.
Yeah.
I'm going to live forever, and it's gonna be way better when I pass on from this life. Like if you don't want to die, I have the key to that." And I was like, "Oh man, I've been like kicking it." I was so bummed at myself, dude. I was like, "How'd I miss? That was such a layup. That was such a good transition."
That's so awesome.
I was
Dang.
like, "God, please bring other opportunities like that back." Holy cow.
Yeah. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I like that.
All right.
Yeah,
So
I would agree with you.
yeah. Do you want to add anything else?
No, I think everything you said was really good. You can take time if you're grieving, if you're really stressed because there's new things in your environment. I think it's fine to slow down, take care of what you need to take care of. But as you have an overflow from the Lord, from your time with Him, and He's giving you the ability, I'd say share as much as you can. I think people, even in stressful situations and even in times of turmoil, have moments of clarity and moments of being able to give. And so there are those rare times, I think, in those situations where you can. But I think you can feel released to spend time with the Lord. Like, I imagine that David, when he was running from Saul and hiding in caves, wasn't necessarily telling everybody he could about Yahweh. You know what I mean? Like, he was running for his life. So
Yeah.
it's probably fine in those instances. He wasn't going to the temple, wasn't making sacrifices, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'd say you're okay in those instances. You don't have to have a bunch of guilt or shame or something like that, or be bogged down by more anxiety, but just let your lifestyle still reflect the Lord, still obey His commands, still let that love overflow. And when the Lord gives you the capacity again, you can share.
Amen. I love it. All
Yep,
right,
and those
guys.
times don't last forever.
All in all, pursue lifestyle evangelism. It's a great time.
Mm-hmm.
And share this
Pretty
with
good.
everybody. First step of lifestyle evangelism, send this podcast to not this absolute episode, but go through just our page. First step, subscribe. Second step, send this to someone who's not subscribed. And
Third step, text "God's not dead" to all your contacts.
yeah. All right, guys. See you next week.
Adios.